hate.
And here we go.
What you're looking at is called the Pyramid of Hate. It was created by the ADL, or Anti-Defamation League. The pyramid shows biased actions or behaviors growing in complexity and violence from the bottom to the top. Starting at the bottom of the Pyramid of Hate, the first layer, the blue layer, is called biased attitudes. The second layer, the green layer, is called acts of bias. The third, yellow layer, is called discrimination. The fourth, orange layer, is called bias-motivated violence. And the fifth and final layer at the top, the red one, is called genocide. Every level negatively impacts individuals and groups. But as you move up the pyramid, the actions become more life-threatening. It also becomes more intentional, moving from casual jokes to, eventually, violence. This is true not only in individual behavior, but also in institutions such as government. In other words, the further up the pyramid you go, the more separated people become until eventually someone gets hurt or killed. Like a pyramid, the upper levels are supported by the lower levels. If people or institutions treat behaviors on the lower blue-green levels as being acceptable or as being normal, it results in the behaviors at the next level, such as the yellow and the red, becoming...
So this two-tier system stopped me having justice. So they just basically lied to the people here with a radio station that I made bad choices in work, and they totally lied and brainwashed them and made this school brainwashing people, and it's not true. I made really good choices, and then they came here and are doing a unlawful activity by treating that person with more favour. You can't treat people with more favour. It's one of the laws. And then I've got discrimination in housing. They're advertising me as dirty, but I've always cleaned my house. And then, what's this? Acts of violence like rape and torture and then murder. Now I'm sick with a tumour and they're not giving me the house. I want you to understand what's going on here.
More accepted. The pyramid builds off of each layer, which is why it's a pyramid. Many of you have a very simple question when hate crimes and tragic events happen. Why? Why did this happen? The Pyramid of Hate attempts to answer that question of why. The Pyramid of Hate demonstrates that the hate of genocide is built upon the acceptance of the actions described in the lower levels of the pyramid. The top cannot exist without the bottom. Next, we'll examine each layer individually.
Hi, at the base of the pyramid are events and circumstances that may seem minor independently, but when combined with some of the other more serious events can lead to some very serious consequences. The first element at the base of the pyramid is a microaggression. I'll put it over here. And that could be something as simple as mispronouncing someone's name and not ever learning how to say it the right way. So, for example, I have a student whose name is spelled E-T-H-A-N. And because of their family background, they don't pronounce it Ethan, he pronounces it Eitan. And if I hadn't learned that about him and learned to pronounce it correctly, that could be considered a microaggression. The second element is stereotypes. And that's a term that I think that we're all familiar with. That's generalizing to a group the characteristics of a single example of that group. The next is called confirmation bias. And what that means is surrounding ourselves with people who tend to share our beliefs and also believing things that support our beliefs and discounting information that doesn't. Next one is fear of differences. And that is self-explanatory. That means that we tend to avoid people or shun people who are different in some way than we are. This one is social bubble, and that also goes along with confirmation bias and fear of differences, and that is having social groups that don't include really people who are different from ourselves. So Individually, some of these things might not be that serious, but together and when combined with a malicious intent can lead to some very serious consequences.
So one of the reasons it's also called a pyramid is because each layer builds off of the previous layer. So you can't really start at the top because it would just collapse. Right. That's why it's a pyramid. So the second layer of the pyramid of hate is, there are a few more parts to it, same as the bottom layer. One example is slurs. Most of us have probably heard a racial slur or some kind of slur in our lifetime. One of the biggest ones in America would be the N-word. Every time you use a racial slur, you are essentially dehumanizing that person. The pyramid is about dehumanization, which means making people less human, or making a category of creating people who are less human than you.
They arrested me because they went back a year ago and found a tweet that I said, if you're not going to abide by our laws, go back to your own country. And they twisted it to make me look racist. And that is injustice. I've been raped, tortured, anally mutilated, genitally mutilated. My face has been mutilated. There's no justice for me. They ruined my natural beauty, and I was natural, and they put chemicals all in me to make me not natural, which is my line of work, was holistic healing. And they're making me look unnatural. They've bleached me. They're not letting me access liberty, which is a human rights abuse.
Part of this layer is bullying. I'm sure most of you know what this is, and have seen an example of bullying. Bullying is akin to using slurs to our saying that this person is inferior to you or deserving of mistreatment. Another example of this is biased jokes. Okay, jokes that are usually hurtful towards a group of people, particularly racial and the final example is called social exclusion, which I'm going to stick on top of this part of the layer because it goes with the bubble and the fear of differences. You exclude to avoid people who don't like you, and you just start to completely avoid them and never interact and never talk to them, which brings us to the next layer.
The next level of the pyramid that we'll discuss is discrimination. And that's where the government or the power structure creates official policy that separates people based on some identifiable characteristic. The first type of discrimination we'll talk about is segregation. And that is separating people by some identifiable characteristic. That may be by gender, that might be socioeconomically, that might be by race, but it's official policy that separates people. The next kind of discrimination is employment discrimination, where people are treated differently at their workplaces based on some characteristic that they have, whether that's not receiving the same compensation because of their gender, not receiving the same job opportunities because of their race, anything that creates unequal or inequitable opportunities based on an identifiable characteristic is an example of employment discrimination. Finally, education. And that is, let me scoot over here so I'm not talking behind the cups. And in education, we can see that in something as simple as easily seen as schools that have different access to technology, where some learning environments are very technologically rich and others don't have the same access to technology, and as a result the students don't have the same access and ability to learn the curriculum that they need to learn.
But it's getting bigger and the colors are getting a little bit angrier as well. The further the pyramid is created, the more violent it gets. So our first example for this level is called a hate crime. Hate crimes are crimes that are motivated because you hate someone. That's the only reason. The most recent example I can think of was the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. The person who committed that crime did it for no other reason that they didn't like the people worshiping at that place of worship. makes it a hate crime. The other example is terrorism. Most of us probably know what this is. The major example in America would be the 9/11 attacks. They were bigger than a hate crime because it was a very large systemic, because it becomes part of a system, act of violence against our country. And the pyramid still grows.
The top and most serious level of the pyramid of hate is genocide, which is a systemic killing of a group of people because they share a characteristic that is undesired by the ruling group. The most noteworthy of these in recent history is the Holocaust, which is what we'll be studying here at IMS and what you'll be learning about throughout your academic career.
So, that is why it is a pyramid. Each level...
They're erasing my divine feminine and making me transsexual and are making me ugly when I've done nothing but give beautiful goddess teachings before this, and it's been a very hard thing to...
Hi, I'm Mr. Reyes.